started with QA Flag. First of all, what is QA Flag? QA Flag is a brand new, still in beta QA testing framework that I'm developing, quite proud of. It's going to be really awesome. But today I'm just going to jump in right into setting up our first test. So what I have going on right now is I just have a Nest.js API, and that API is very simple. I've just got two endpoints. The one I'm going to be focusing on today is just called countries, and it just gets me a list of countries. That's really all it does. I have that running, as you see, on port 3000 on my local host. So I want to set up a test for this. So what I'm going to do first of all is, if I haven't already, I'm going to set up the QA Flag CLI globally. So I'm going to do npm-i-g QA Flag /CLI. That is going to install that CLI from me. So I have that command QA Flag, which I'll use as soon as this completes. Okay, so that completes. I can now run QA Flag, and we see I get my little options. And what I'm going to do now is I need to initialize QA Flag in this repository, in this project. So I'm just going to run QA Flag init, and you'll see it asks me some questions. It says, what's the default domain? My default domain there is localhost 3000, so I'm just going to stick with that, but you can change that. It's going to say, where's my source folder? I want to have my test suites live right alongside my Nest code. So I'm going to leave that as src and okay. And then finally, it asks me what different kinds of tests that I need to do. QA Flag can do all kinds of various tests, and many more flavors are coming soon. But right now I just need to test JSON. So I'm just going to tick that with the space bar, click enter. It's going to install my dependencies right now. So if I look at my package right now, after this completes, you'll see it just added those two dependencies in here. And it also created my QA flag.json and my QA flag tsconfig.json. One more thing that I recommend that you do specifically with Nest is I added here this last part onto my excludes so that Nest.js does not try to build my test suites along with its regular build process. Okay, cool. So now I have QA Flag installed in my project, but I don't actually have any tests. So let's go ahead and create our first test. I already have that pre-written, so I'm just going to copy and paste this over here. And what we're going to do is go right into, in this case, I'm going to go right into the folder with my countries controller. And I'm going to create a new file here. I'm just going to call it countries.suite.ts. I'm going to paste this content in here. Okay, so let's just go through real quick what this is actually doing here. So we see just your normal import stuff. We're importing both our core QA Flag library and also the one specifically for JSON. And then I'm defining a class. Now you can call this class anything that you want. My recommendation is that you name it descriptively, and also probably that you name it after the file. So I have countries controller and country suite. So I'm calling this class country suite. You notice here that I'm extending suite, which is part of the core QA Flag library. And it's actually a function that returns the class that we're extending. So it's a little bit different syntax than maybe you might be used to, but it's really, really cool, really easy to follow. The only thing I really have to specify here is the title, which just gives me something that we want to call this test suite. That makes sense. And also we want to set the type. So we're telling it that the type of tests in this suite are JSON scenarios. So the next thing is we've defined a method, and we call this method something descriptive again. In this case, we want to get a list of countries and verify that that comes back properly. So I descriptively called that get list of countries. And our one argument here, we just call context. It's kind of the convention in QA Flag. And that is a JSON context, since this is a JSON scenario. And that will give us all the TypeScript goodness that we'll really value when we continue here. The other thing to call out is we have a scenario decorator. Now that I can create all the different functions here, methods in this class that I want, but only the ones that are decorated with the scenario decorator are going to actually execute a scenario. So the only thing that is required, and the only thing I've set here, is I've set my my URI as a get method with the countries as the path. Lastly, we have a few actual test assertions here. We have, first of all, we find countries. And so this is, won't get into the actual query syntax, but this is JSON schema to select basically what I'm doing is I'm selecting, you see it comes back with an array. I'm just selecting everything in that array. So that's what we're doing here. We're saving that as countries. And then I'm making a couple of assertions, and you'll see the assertions with QA flag are very easy to read. They're basically sentences. So all assertions will have either must or should. Usually must. Must is obligatory, and should is a kind of a way to assert optionally. But that's kind of a side note. So we have countries must be an array. Very easy to follow. Countries must all have properties, name, and code. Again, really easy to follow. As you type here, we type out countries, you'll see that we have really good auto completion. So we say must all be an object, for example. So everything in that array must be an object. So then I add another assertion. Okay, cool. So now let's go ahead and run that. So I'm going to write QA flag -- build -- all, which is just going to say build my test suites and run all of them. In this case, I only have one of them so far, so that's all I really need to do. So we're going to do that. Oop, I forgot to type run. It's actually QA flag run build all. So we run that. It says transpiling suites with TSC. And we'll see here in a second that it created a QA flag folder for me as it did that. And it transpiled that into a JS file. And then it also ran my suite. So if we just looked at what it did, it ran the test countries endpoint. It passed. It ran in 38 milliseconds. We see the endpoint that it hit. And then we see the assertions that it ran. It automatically did by default a 200 status code assertion. If we wanted to change that for some reason, we could change, or not for some reason, if we wanted to change that, we could do a different status code instead of the default 200. But you see it did that test for me automatically, tested that it was an array, tested that it had those two properties, and finally tested that they're all objects. So that's really all there is to it. Hopefully you can dive in and get started. Go to qaflag.com. Again, it's really early beta at this stage, but I think this project has a lot of promise, and I hope that you'll agree. Thank you.